My work experience, the last 4 years, I was more or less a web monkey, and transitioned from a small company to a big company. And I saw a lot of interesting challenges on the management side of things. It wasn't directly video game related. It was a totally different industry, but I've always loved video games. And I kind of reached a point towards the end of my kind of web monkey career that I was really interested in just sort of seeing how operations worked and just kind of seeing, how communications broke down. And I got really frustrated with not being able to do anything about it. So I wanted to take those lessons that I learned, continue building on that, but apply that to an industry that I actually had a passion for. So if you're leaning more towards being more of a producer, less of a designer, I would highly recommend looking into production methodologies. You'll hear that thrown around probably towards the middle or end of first semester, and it'll initially seem like a buzzword. And some of the other producers probably won't really look into it. But once you start getting into the bigger games, you need to start thinking long term in terms of how is the project going to be organized? How are you going to communicate tasks? How are you going to break things down? How are you going to structure it? Because inevitably, even in the industry, you're going to see projects fall behind schedule, things are going to need to get cut, and you need to know how to address that. You need to plan for that. You need to understand how to do contingency plans. So I highly recommend starting to get into that mindset, taking a look at agile methodologies, Scrum, checking out some software out there as far as how to structure that. Get familiar with that, and you'll have a leg up when you start dealing with those problems later. So. I chose FIEA because honestly, I was introduced to it in 2005 when I was over at UCF. At the time, no offense, it seemed a little sketchy because it was a little new, it was a little nebulous, and I was a little kind of burnt out from my time in undergrad. But I sort of took a peek at the FIEA site every few years, kind of got a sense of how things were developing, and I actually saw Matt Reed on Xbox Live, like just for some random video on Madden. And I'd also been looking at the website, getting updated, and I kept seeing his face everywhere, and I was just like, all right, if this Joker can do it, then I have a chance of doing this, so. My expectations, and it's just my nature, I always look at worst case scenario. So when I first came into the program, I thought everything looked pretty solid from what I'd seen from the website, what I heard from staff. But regardless of that, I still looked at it as worst case scenario. I'm walking away with connections from the students here. But even with that mentality, my expectations have been far surpassed. It took me a little while to kind of acclimate to working with Rick, because Rick is kind of very, very challenging, but in a good way. It takes a while to kind of understand what he's looking for. But yeah, I mean, there's always an opportunity to sponge up stuff from everybody here. In fact, if I would say there's one thing that's frustrating about FIEA is that there's not enough time to soak up as much as you possibly can, so you have to pick and choose, what are you going to focus on and what are you going to neglect. So. I would say if anything surprised me about the program, it's the level of talent in the students. I mean, the faculty have, pretty easy to find credentials. The students, we're all pretty young for the most part, but even without having a lot of experience, there are some kids here that just have insane work ethic, and just being in the same environment with them kind of forces you to, either catch up or try to, just stay on their level. And I think that's awesome. I think that's the best type of environment you can be in a place like this. I think I pulled my first all-nighter at FIEA during the first rapid prototype. So yeah, it didn't take long. So that would be maybe 3 weeks, maybe less. In undergrad, the nature of my bachelor's degree, most of it was centered around group projects, but the issue I consistently saw was there wasn't really a structure there, and there wasn't any sort of discipline to really make those group projects into something more. You always kind of had one or two core people kind of carrying the team, and then other people, whether just they weren't comfortable in that setting or they just didn't have the experience actually working in there, they were kind of just extra bodies attached to the team. The thing that I've always been impressed with here is the vast majority of people are solid. You know, people find their roles very naturally, particularly once we get past that first semester. Second semester, everybody's very aware of what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and we've also started to learn how to sort of supplement those weaknesses. So it's more organic here. The workload's distributed a little bit more evenly. So I think here is, I can't think of a better example of you know, a group environment to work in.